secret societies, conspiracy theories, religious extremists battling to control the world. That's all part of the new novel, The Testament by Eric Van Lustbader. The best-selling author is here today. Pleasure to have you here today, Eric.
It's great to be here, Greg.
Well, I think you have tapped into something with this book because there definitely seems to be a bit of a fascination by some people out there with conspiracy theories. What do you make of that?
I think people have been fascinated by conspiracies for, since civilization. Mm-hmm. People like to see things that are in big events. They like to see conspiracies, people behind the scenes.
Yep.
And one of my fascinations is the secret history of the world. What happened throughout history that we don't know about, yep, or might not know about. I mean, one of my jobs as a writer, I think, is to extrapolate from historical incidents and
what
create,
really happened.
Yeah, what really happened, but create possibilities that people haven't thought of.
Because at one point, and I thought, well, he's either having some fun with this, or you said something like, I mean, you basically turned over everything. I mean, all of history at one point. They said something, like, that basically behind the scenes everything was completely different than we thought. Like these people were pulling the strings behind everything. That's right. From Hiroshima, Nagasaki to.
That's right. That's right. The order was involved in trying to work for good, but of course, events get out of control. No one society can stop World War II or stop assassinations, but they can work behind the scenes to do damage control, make things better than they could have been without them.
Right. Well, okay, so in the book, obviously, there's a fictionalization, I'm presuming, of what was happening behind the scenes. But again, definitely, people really believe this happens in real life. For instance, 9/11, as we're coming up on the 5th year anniversary, and as more and more time goes on, more and more people are coming forward with all kinds of conspiracy theories about 9/11. What do you think of some of those conspiracies? Being a New Yorker, by the way.
Well, yeah, I actually don't know. I mean, I think people still have visions. People are still writing about the Kennedy assassinations. There are so many conspiracy theories about that, from the FBI to Fidel Castro to the mafia. Are any of those true? I don't know, but they could be. I mean,
right, and we know there are conspiracies. I mean, yes, like in Rome. I mean, they have these cabals or whatever you call them. They get, they conspire and they'd kill the emperor or something, or I mean, there were definitely conspiracies in history.
Julius Caesar was assassinated through a conspiracy. Yes, conspiracies happened throughout history, and people like to know about things that they're not being told. They want to know the real scoop behind everything.
Right.
And
that there's the media conspiracy. We're controlling everything.
Yes, right. Right, well, but when you get outside the United States and you listen to news from other countries, even Great Britain, if you watch the BBC, for instance, which you now can on in America, and you watch their coverage of the war in Iraq as opposed to CNN's or Fox or whatever you want, you think you're watching two different incidents.
And what do you make of that? I mean, on the one hand, I guess it's good because you can do, I don't know, comparative journalism, if you will, and kind of check the headlines. But yet you do have the opportunity to do that these days with the internet, so it's not...
Well, the internet helps, I think, but, news has taken on a different tone since the glory days of CBS, when their news division was their shining star. I think news divisions have now become adjuncts of entertainment.
Right.
And everybody wants to have, there's so many competing, not only competing channels, but different forms of media, that you have to be as sensational as possible to get as many viewers or listeners or what have you.
That has always been my complaint. When people talk about the media conspiracies and think that Rupert Murdoch is sitting there, writing every news story that goes on TV, my complaint is just sensationalism. I think they go for fluff and sensationalism. That's my main problem.
Well, that's right, they do. And all the really good, serious anchors are gone.
Speaking of which, since you're mentioning CBS and the new anchors, what do you think of Katie Couric and?
Well, I like Katie Couric. I honestly, I've been on book tour since she started, because she started on the 5th which is the date the Testament came out. So I've been on tour, and they've been running me 24/7. So I haven't had a chance to see her, but the reviews are sort of like it's the same old thing.
Yeah.
Just with a different face.
I did hear someone say they thought it was a bit soft, maybe because it was a slow news day. I don't know.
Well, it could be. I mean, I'd have to watch over the course of a month.
I haven't seen it myself, so I wish you were well.
To see. Yeah, I do too. I happen to like her.
Well, the other interesting thing about this, of course, is that not only do you have the conspiracy theories, but you have the religious extremists and the religious angle to this. On the one hand, well, I guess in the heels of the Da Vinci Code, number one, is it easier to sell something like this today? Is there more of an interest in this from people?
I don't know whether it has to do with the Da Vinci Code. There have been books about religious orders, the four, the quincunx, that have come out before the Da Vinci Code. Mm-hmm. But as in everything else, being at the right place at the right time, tapping into what is called the zeitgeist, which is the collective unconscious of where things are.
Right. And TV,
is really important.
Yeah, look at TV copying everyone. One thing's a hit.
Well, exactly. I mean, take CSI. 10 years ago, there was a show on NBC called Unsub, which was exactly like CSI. Actually, was better written. But the time was wrong for it. It was on for either one season or 2 seasons, and it didn't get the viewership. Was it because it wasn't a good show? No, the time wasn't right for it. Right. The time was right now for CSI, and the time was right now for the Da Vinci Code. But the reason I wrote this, I've never read the Da Vinci Code, so I don't really know what it's about.
I saw the movie, but I didn't.
I didn't see the movie either. I deliberately didn't. I didn't want to. The reason I did this book was because I saw my books always have a very relevant aspect to them. I can't write thrillers that don't relate to the world. Yes, yeah. And what I saw was a confluence of politics and religion changing the world's foreign policy. And I started wondering how that happened. And when I went back to research I went back to the 12th and 13th century in the original Crusades, and I saw that that's what was going on then. All power was focused on the Pope and the Church. That's where all the power and money was, and there was the confluence of politics and religion, the same as it is now. And it's an interest. I'm fascinated by the fact that everything comes full circle. So we're in the same kind of situation we were then. Obviously not, but in this one aspect, we're in the same position we were in the 13th century, and with now the rise of there were always extremists within all religions.
Sure.
But for instance, in Islam,
right.
there are whole factions of religious extremists. It's not just religious extremists versus us. Osama bin Laden, for instance, is Wahhabi. He's Saudi.
Yep.
He's very religious. His form of Islam, he wants to kill everybody, including Muslims who don't follow his way of, his interpretation of Islam.
Right. There is a very strong division, just as among Christians, let's say, between Catholics and Protestants, where they've been known to kill each other throughout history, but definitely between Sunnis and Shias, or the Wahhabis, or some of the various, specific sects. I actually just did a show with somebody who wrote a book about that conflict, and it's a little bit mind-boggling, I think, in a way, or I don't know what the right word is for it, but when you see all the different religious factions and realize almost what an axe they have to grind with each other, because of very specific, almost technical, or it was sort of like Gulliver's Travels with like the little, the people who turn their, the big end of the egg and the little end of the egg, and you almost think, what are they arguing over?
Well, the differences could be minuscule, but to them they're really, really important. Yeah. What I'm trying to inform people about is why this is all happening. Because I don't think that this war, as the President says, war on terror, can be ended through conflict. It's not going to be we're going to be exterminated, they're going to be exterminated. This is a long-term process, and unless we learn about each other and find some kind of understanding where everybody can live together, we're going to be all in trouble. Exactly.
We'll be right back with Eric Van Lustbader right after this. We are back with Eric Van Lustbader today talking about his new book, The Testament. So you were just giving us your take on, well, you said conflict is not the way to solve the problem in the Middle East. What do you think is the right way to approach it?
Well, I think first of all, it's a long-term solution. It's not gonna happen overnight or even in 5 years. But I think the way to handle, the only way we can do it is for us to learn more about them and not think of them as aliens. I mean, the more you learn about other people, the more you understand them. And once you understand them, you can find a way to a middle ground. And I think one of the things we need to do is to reach out to the moderate Islamic or Muslim community and to re-educate people. I mean, after all, there is an endless supply of 13-year-olds who are brought up hating the United States, hating the West, putting on flak jackets filled with C4 and going out and blowing themselves up.
Right.
We have to stop that cycle of violence, and the only way to do that is to re-educate people, not to kill them, because you can't keep killing people that self-propagate.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a good generation or two minimum, as you said, with people growing up. Personally, I think with some sort of like liberal education or something, and not just some of the more extreme religious. Well, that's part of the problem, though, is religion is so common, like in the Wahhabis, you know, they want a very strict, hardcore religion.
And
in
also
schools.
The problem in the world is every time you find a leader who is willing to be moderate, to compromise, to talk, it's assassinated.
Yeah, well, and again, they're, you know, obviously they've been knocking each other off a lot on both sides, really even more than the U.S. troops. I mean, there have been more deaths, and if you don't, in fact, you know, and again, this is true of Christians when they disagree, you know, I mean, there have been, you know, in, what is it, in Northern Ireland, when the one side marches through the other one's neighborhood, you know, they have to have the police present so that they don't kill each other. But you really have the two sides. In other words, they think that, you know, the Sunnis, the extremists will think that being a Shia is worse than being Christian.
That's
or, you know,
absolutely
being the
true.
other sect is worse than being an infidel.
Right.
So,
but that's true of almost any religion.
Right.
If the more religious you are, the more fundamental you are, the narrower your focus, and the less tolerant you are. You want everyone to be, if they're not like you, then they're not part of your religion at all.
Well, the way of the world seems to be, if they're not like you, you just kill them.
That's right.
You know,
and
unfortunately,
we have to break that cycle. One of the things I wanted to talk about was one of the underlying aspects of this book, like it was with The Born Legacy, my previous book, is a relationship between a father and son. My father died 3 years ago. He was my best friend. He was 90 years old, and when people say to me, well, he had a long life, so why are you upset? I mean, I don't understand that. You know, he was my best friend. I'll never have that relationship again. I wanted to go on forever because he and I were that close. And when I look back on it, everything I've written since he died has to do with a father and son relationship.
But it's interesting because the father and son in this book were not so close.
They were not close, but after the father's death, which happens, I'm not giving anything away, it happens in the first couple of pages, the father's spirit, his teachings live on in his son, and the son learns to understand his father, because after all, his father had not only part of a secret society, but had a whole secret life that he didn't tell anybody about. And it's really about reconciling the father and son relationship, and the son really taking on the mantle of the father, because his father really couldn't do everything that Bravo, his son, can do. Bravo is the one who can really bring everyone together. And to me, that's kind of an elemental, fundamental relationship that everybody can relate to.
Well, and that's interesting because I think that I like that against the backdrop of the world events and history and the conspiracies and everything, you go to the more human level, you know, like a father and a son. And
but that's the way to make a book to pull readers in, to make them want to read it as characters. I always believe that the actual mechanism of the book, the plot, is not as important as character. If you don't have good characters, it doesn't matter, for me at least, I'm just talking for me, it doesn't matter what the plot is, I'm not interested. I really have to have characters that I believe in and seem real to me.
Well, and for me, I think too, though, in a different context, that even when you look at world events, people often look at people as groups or types. I mean, whether it's economic, the communist or the socialist versus the capitalist, or you have the various religions. But honestly, and maybe because of what I do, when I sit down and they're there in a chair and there's a human being there, I always look for the human element, meaning that they've even said that, for instance, in Al-Qaeda, that they had complaints about the one guy was complaining that the other guy was making more money than him. And I think, what does that tell you? Or I've interviewed a gang member who, he fell in love with the woman who's the sister of his worst enemy on the other side. And, so I always see people there, like you said, it's a father and a son. Or so when people talk about the conspiracies and the government, but really, I mean, it's you and me and, one person at a time adding up.
But the only way to make sense of large events is to personalize them.
Right.
Is to say, here's a person inside it, this is how it has affected him, and everybody sees it as a different point of view. And part of what part of what artists do, whether they're writers or musicians or artists, painters, whatever, what have you, is that their goal is to make their listeners or their readers see the world in a different way, and maybe find something in themselves that they haven't seen before.
What did you learn from writing this novel? You obviously did a lot of historical research.
I did, yes.
So what did you get out of this?
Well, when I was young, my dad would read me stories the way, when I went to sleep, the way most fathers do. But unlike, I was a very precocious child, so I didn't want to...
You were probably writing the stories that he read you.
Well, I didn't want to hear the same stories over and over again. So he went to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and he told me those stories. But eventually he had told all the stories that he knew, so he started to make up more of those stories for me. But through him, I got a love of the Middle Ages and knights. And so I knew about the knights, but I didn't know much more about the Middle Ages. And what I learned from here that was just fascinating, we touched on it in the segment before a little bit, is how important the church was in medieval times. The only peoples who could travel in those times were knights and religious orders. And the religious orders, the Pope sent out religious orders to what was then called the Levant, which is the Middle East and the Near East, what we know as the Middle East now, not only to proselytize, which is what people would just figure, but to negotiate trade routes, to get monopolies, to get money. And those religious orders were very active and very aggressive, some of them, the ones that were in the Pope's employ. And that's why I decided that I had to have two religious orders in this book, because that's where all the power lay in the 13th and 12th and 13th centuries, in these religious orders. The two religious orders in this book obviously are fictitious, but they're pastiches. They could have existed, because I've done so much research that they're based on parts of other orders put together in a way that makes sense for the book.
Well, I'm curious. Obviously, the church had enormous power throughout history. When the Catholic Church basically ran Italy at various points and that sort of thing. The church doesn't look too good in this book.
No, it doesn't.
Well, we come back, I would ask you about that and see if there's been any reaction, because I'm assuming the Catholics may have some feelings about that. But we'll be right back with Eric Van Lustbader right after this. We are back with Eric Van Lustbader today, talking about the Testament. Okay, so what do the Catholics think of this book?
Well, look, the book just came out a couple of days ago, so it's too early. But I hope I get a reaction out of them, only because, you want to get people talking about things, whether it's controversial or not. I didn't write this as a religious text. It's fiction. It's based on fact.
I think that was a reaction to the Da Vinci Code too, by the way. Various people said, well, we know there's fiction, and this is obviously fiction, so they didn't
but anyone is going to, you know, anyone with a very narrow mind is going to take offense at almost anything. So, but one of the things that's in this book is the Secret Gospel of Mark, which is a true document that was found in 1958 in a monastery in Sumela, right outside of Jerusalem. It's very controversial. Of course, a lot of historians and the church disavow it entirely. But what it says is that Christ was a miracle worker, meaning he was a magical figure, which goes against everything the church preaches. And even the religious historians, historical Jesus was not a miracle worker. But in the Bible, it says that he resurrected Lazarus by anointing him with oil. Well, how did he do that? And I extrapolated from that, and I don't want to give too much away, but the book is based on real things. Are they facts? I don't know, but the Secret Gospel of Mark does exist.
So how much of the book do you think is based on fact? I mean, how would you react to that?
Oh, you want a percentage?
Well, roughly. In other words, because you did a lot of historical
research. Yes, everything is real. Everything I talk about, the church and women's role in church, which we didn't get to touch on.
But you claim though that the women actually had a greater role in the church than is commonly believed. Now, do you really think that, or not? Was that just for the purpose of the
think
novel?
In certain pockets it is true. What I talk about here about the nuns in Venice is absolutely true.
Really?
Yes, it comes from a factual book, and one of the things they did was that the prostitutes came to hear confessions with them, although they would not. Nuns are not allowed to hear confessions, but the prostitutes in Venice felt comfortable with the women. But
and you said the prostitutes knew everything from everybody in town.
Well,
so
of course, because everybody was
going
to bed with them, including the doges and the big politicos, and even the people in the church.
Was it true that the nuns dressed up as monks and went around town, or dressed up as...
Yes, that is absolutely true.
Wow.
That was one of the ways. I mean, this one woman in the book. That's all true.
Wow.
Absolutely true. One of the things, the last thing I wanted to touch on is about the outsider. When I was in college, I read a book called The Outsider by Colin Wilson, who is a British philosopher. He was an orphan, grew up literally in the London libraries, taught himself everything.
Wow.
And he wrote this book called The Outsider, and his theory about the outsider was that the outsider was the one-eyed man in the land of the blind, that he was outside of society and therefore could observe society without being biased. He was the person who could see things that others couldn't, and he was also the person who was searching for himself. And when I read that book, I said, this is me down to a T. I mean, I just felt, and all of my characters are outsiders in that way. And I think a lot of people react favorably to my characters because I think a lot of people, more than even would admit to themselves, either have felt like outsiders at some point of their life, or they now feel like outsiders. And I think they respond to my characters in that way. I want to say that Bravo, Braverman Shaw here, is I think my best character since Nicholas Lanier, the hero of the ninja.
So in a way, you put a little bit of yourself in the book, then.
There's quite a bit of myself in this book, and also quite a bit of my father in it as well.
Now, with the conspiracy theories, though, that also, you think maybe people who are a little bit on the outside of societies embrace that as well? Do you think?
Yes,
that's true,
I think that outsiders tend to want to form into secret societies who are outside of society, whether it be the CIA or some secret organizations, religious, whatever, and they feel like outsiders, and outsiders want to come together with like-minded people.
Well, thank you very much for being here today, Eric.
It was my pleasure, Gregory.
Likewise, this is Eric Van Lustbader. The book is The Testament, telling us what really was going on throughout history. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you guys next time. Thanks everybody for watching. So, what else have you got in the works? You've got the Bourne book.